Okay, so this is Substance Painter. My license needs to renew soon. So you can get a free license of Substance packages if you're a student. You just need to show them your ID card in evidence that you're a student, and then they'll grant you a year, I think, of access to Substance Painter. So you need to renew it every year, so mine's obviously coming up for renewal. So this is essentially the new way of texturing. It allows for Pbr materials, which are physically based materials. So if you think about how light works and hits materials and how that affects the way that they look, that's essentially what this program does. So something like cotton or fabric, if you think of your clothes, if you were to look at them through a microscope, you'd find that they look like mountains, right? Because of the amount of texture that's in them. That means that when light hits that surface, it gets lost inside and it doesn't bounce back out, which means that it's not reflective. Compare that with something like gold that's got a much harder surface, or glass that's got a completely hard surface. That's when you will get reflection bouncing back at you, because the light's hitting the object. And again, if you look at it through a microscope, you'll see that there's very little texture in one of these sort of assets, these materials, so you'll get reflection. So that's essentially what the program does, and it's phenomenal at doing it. There used to be another piece of software called Quicksort that's still around. I think they're still trying to make a name for themselves, but they got kicked to the curb by Substance a while ago. So let's bring our NES controllers in. We're going to start with the one from 3ds Max, and then we'll look at the one from Blender to show you how the two work pretty much the same, but one of them's got an ID map. The Max one's got an ID map. So in order to start, you come up to this is what you'll look like when you first open it, by the way. It might open up with a little character in here. Don't worry about that, just go to File and New, and then here where we've got Template, we're going to click on Select, and then you're going to go and grab the low poly. So here are 3ds NES low FBX. I'm going to click Open on that, and then the next things that we need to just check here are the settings for the document resolution. There's the main one. So this, we want to make sure that's set to 2048. We can always reduce that down on the fly later. So with that set on 2048, we can click OK. The rest of it should be fine, and that will import our low poly NES and also our material, or our unwrap. Okay, so here's how I've unwrapped mine. So if you don't see this when you import, or this looks wrong, then stop what you're doing and go back and redo this in 3ds, because you've unwrapped incorrectly, or you exported the wrong asset or something like that. So if you're not seeing your asset on one side and the correct unwrap on this side, and when I say correct unwrap, I also mean like everything, so you can see that all of my parts are there. If you haven't got that, then go back to Max or Blender and restart your unwrapping. Cool. So this is my low poly, and you can tell it's low poly because if you look at it from certain angles, we've got very sort of right angled corners on. I've got a little bit of a chamfer running around the edges, but everything else is quite sharp in terms of, especially at the bottom here, you can see how sharp that edge is. So that's why, and also we don't have any of the detailing, so the little cutouts that we've got at the top here, oops, the cutout at the back here, that isn't there either, this bit here, and then on the control D-pad as well, we don't have the little circle that we need in there either. So in order to get all those details, we need to bake our high poly mesh. So we come over to this render, this texture set settings, scroll down, and you'll find mesh maps and bake mesh maps. So here, click on bake mesh maps. First thing you want to do straight away, common mistake, is this output size up here defaults to 512. Push that back up to 2K. And then right here, this is where we're going to import our high poly. So we want a high definition mesh, and we're going to click on this little option here, which is to add. And we want our 3ds NES high, so I'm going to select that and open. And then, so we're going to bake certain things here, and the first thing I want to do is just check if our normal map's baked correctly. So I'm only going to have normal selected, and then I'm going to make sure I've got my high in here. I'm going to leave these defaulted on 0.01 at the moment, and I'm just going to hit bake down here. That's going to take a little bit of time. You can see what it's doing there. it's looking at the high poly that we've created, and it's looking at the low poly, and it's basically moving all those details from the high to the low. So now if we look around the object, we've now got this line that we didn't have before. Our edges now look nice and smooth, whereas before they weren't. So remember this bit here. We've got the detail of the hole at the back. These are coming through, but we've got a slight issue. So you can see a line here that we need to edit our bake. We'll do that in a second. But you can see it's basically smoothed off. It's added our little circle in here. It's smoothed all of the edges that were, or that are, solid edges. So this is how we make something look high poly when actually it's low poly. Okay, so the thing that's ever so slightly wrong is this bit here. So this bit, I want to just have a look and see if we can edit that by adjusting these two here. So basically what these are doing is, if you think about your high poly and your low poly, let's have a look at them in here. So the high poly goes in, right? So it goes in quite far, whereas the low poly doesn't do that. We'll just unhide that low poly for a second. The low poly doesn't do that. So what's happening is substance isn't baking far enough into the object. So we need to tell it here that we want the rear to go in a little further, and we can push the max up a little bit as well, just in case. And then click render again. You can see we're starting to lose that now. That line is looking better. So it may be that we need to push that even further. Some of you might decide that you don't like this look at all, and you'd rather have that as a hard recess. So actually edit the geometry to have that hard recess in there. Others of you will think that that's fine. It's up to you, so it's a personal preference on what you think is fine. Let's just try pushing that a little bit further. Okay, so it's starting to get rid of it now, right? So that's how you do that. Now, texturing this asset. So if we come back up, go to our layers. The first thing we want to do, because this is the max one, I want to bring in my ID map. Okay. In fact, the first thing I want to do before I do that, because we remember we only baked the normal map up here, so I want to bake the rest of them. So I want to bake world space, ambient occlusion, curvature, position. I don't need to bake thickness. Thickness works well for parts of an object that are very thin, almost transparent. So if you think about human's ear, where you can almost like see light coming through it, thickness works well for things like that. This object is solid, so we don't need to use it. So position is where the object is. Curvature is what's up, what's down, what's left, what's right, where are the edges. So curvature maps will create a separate map that shows up where the edges are. Really useful if we're doing if we're going to have sort of like damaged edges on the asset. Ambient occlusion is lighting. So if there's any areas where the light pools, so see that down here and underneath here, where the light's going to kind of get caught a little bit in those little areas, that's going to bake that one for us. And then we've got normal and world space normal, so just normal maps that we create. So right, I'm going to hit bake now, making sure that I'm still on 2048, and we're going to bake a few more maps now. You see it's baking each of them individually. There's the curvature, and there's our position. So now we've got, you can see this sort of slight darker shading running through. We've got a little bit of sort of light or shading detail going through there now, and that's the ambient occlusion map. Okay, so now that I've baked those, let's come back to our layers. I want to import that map. So I'm going to come up to the top here. I'm going to import resources. I'm going to add a resource, and I want to import there's our donut tutorial. Where did I save it? Here. So there's my my ID map. I'm going to open that. When you import a resource into Substance, it needs to know what type of resource it is. So this is a texture. So we're importing a texture, and then this bit here, import your resources to. So Substances, this is quite useful. So it allows you to either import it into the current session, which means that when you close this session or this file, you will lose whatever you've imported. You can import it to the project, so this project that we've got here, so that means that it will save on the project, but if we opened up a completely different project, so something that isn't a NES controller, then this ID map won't be there. Or shelf means it will just put it into the this area here. This is the area called the shelf. It will put it into here, into the textures slot, and it will stay there forever. So I only want it in the project, so I'm going to import it into project Untitled. Probably should have named the project, and then click import. And it's imported it here, look. So there's my ID map. So to apply that ID map, we're going to go to our texture set settings again, and we're going to scroll down until we see select ID map here, and we can just click and drag that straight in to there. Cool, done. Right, that's going to come in useful in a moment. So now what we're going to do is just apply some textures to this. So I'm in my layers tab. Some of this stuff might be in a different place for you, but basically just look for layers. I'm in my layers tab. You can move these around, by the way. You can unpin them and pin them. So if you want kind of some on top of the other, or left or right or whatever, then you can just apply them wherever you want. So I've got them separated now. I'll put them on the same one. There we go. Right, so in layers, I'm going to add my first texture. So the NES controller has this sort of plasticky grey colour. So first thing is, I don't want this layer. I'm going to delete that one. I'm going to add a new fill layer. So now, key thing to remember in Substance is that fill layers you cannot draw over the top of. Opacic or just standard layers you can draw. Okay, so you can add like fonts and like draw detail on. Fill layers you can't do that. Just remember that. Okay, so with this first fill layer, I'm going to go and choose a texture. So we're going to come down to Materials, and then here's my kind of default set of materials. If I scroll down, I'm going to find something called plastic. So we've got plastic grid, plastic, all these different types of plastic in here. I'm going to choose this plastic matte, and that's just going to fill the whole object now has that plastic texture on it, right? Holding down Shift and right click will allow you to rotate the light in your scene. Okay, so the first thing is the NES controller isn't blue, right? So if we just pull this down a little bit so we can see our layers down here, I'm in my properties for my layer now. So inside that properties, I can say that I want the NES controller to be grey. However, light grey or dark grey is up to you. So this is where your ability to copy the real world asset comes in. Then this texture, this fill texture that we put in here, we're currently using colour, metalness, roughness. There's no normal detail and there's no height detail on here. If we wanted them, we turn these on, but we don't. It's not metal. If the asset was metal, then we can pull this slider up, and the further it goes up and goes towards white, the asset now has a metal look to it, right? So it has this sort of metal sheen. The roughness is how much the light is being reflected from the object. So the higher that is, means the less light is reflected. The lower that is, so into the black, means it's being highly reflective. So there we can see that we've got a chrome looking colour going on there. So the NES controller is, it's definitely not metal, and it's not as reflective as that. So it's somewhere in the sort of middle, something like that, I would say. So that's just for the grey section. Now, the next thing is we're going to add another material. So let's just rename, make sure you're naming these things. So NES underscore grey. Then I'm going to add a new material. So I'm going to go to another fill layer. And this one, I want to also be plastic, but I want that sort of that grainy plastic that's on the black section that runs around here on the NES controller. I haven't got one in front of me at the moment, so I'm kind of eyeballing this at the moment. So if I click on grainy here, that's going to apply it, and because it's on a layer above the grey one, it's applying it to the whole asset. Okay. Right, a couple of things we want to do quickly first is the grain on this is way too big, right? So with that fill layer selected, I'm just going to change the name of this as well. So NES underscore black. So it's the black section of the controller. First thing we want to do is change the scale of this. So we can come up here. So again, I'm inside properties. I'm on black. I'm inside properties, and then we can go to scale and we can increase that so that it's much finer. Okay. So if we zoom in, we can see that's the sort of detail that we want. Now, the issue that we've got here is that it's covering everything that we've done in the grey. So here's where our ID map's going to come in useful. So if we right click in here, and then we come up to add mask with colour selection. Okay, so if we click on that, then we can go pick colour here. So this is for our black colour. Where do we want it to go? So we click on pick colour, and then we choose the purple, and it will then only apply that black into that area, the purple area that we chose in the ID map. Okay. Then we can move on, so we can add more and more of textures into here. So let's go to fill again, and let's go with plastic but glossy this time, because it's for the buttons. So I'm going to do these red buttons over here. So I'm going to click on that again, right click that, make sure that we colour assign it to the buttons, so this yellow. You can see if we just move across, that's now applied it to those buttons for me. I've got blue shiny buttons, and then I can come back into this, let's rename this. There's buttons. I can click on the blue, click here, and then change that to red. So there we've got now the red buttons that we want. And then move on, so we keep going. So we can add in another fill layer. This one is going to be, let's choose, it looks a little bit odd, we want sort of a rubber. We can do a search. Oh, there is no rubber, interesting. Okay, so let's find something that's close. So I'm going to go with, I think this silicone coat might work. If you hover over them, it gives you a little look at them, so I'm going to choose that. I want it to be a little darker. I wanted to reduce the amount of, so this grain that we've got on there, I want to increase that so it's more detail. And then if we look at it in terms of the roughness, so we don't want it to be shiny, we want it to be matte, quite matte, that section of the controller, like that. And then again, this is our start underscore select, isn't it? Start select buttons. I can right click that, tell that to go onto a certain colour, certain material, and that's these guys here. So then now we can see that those have got that material on. Okay, we're almost there. We just got to do the shiny material for this, and then I'll show you how we can add the arrows in here by just using a normal map and a paintbrush. So let's add the colour for this one. So again, adding another fill layer, call that D underscore pad. And then this one we want the shiny plastic again, so this glossy one, and we want to make sure that that colour is set to black. And then also right click, mask with colour selection, pick colour, and we're picking our D pad, and that then applies that onto that part there. So that's our asset with the very basic standard colours set up on it. So the next thing is, remember I told you that you can't do any painting. So look, my paintbrush is unavailable at the moment, so I can't go in here and start adding in lines and things like that, because all of these materials that we've added on here so far, let me just make this a bit bigger, these are all fill, right? And you know they're all fill layers because you can't see it quite on that one, but they've all got these little paint bucket icons on. So we want to add something that we can draw on. So over here we're going to use a standard layer. So click on that and it adds a layer on the top. And this one I'm just going to call it normal underscore details. Okay, so it's going to add any normal map details that I want onto this asset. Now you can see I've got my brushes selected, so I can draw on here now. So what do I want to draw? So with my normal map selected, my normal detail selected, that layer, in my properties bar up here I've got the settings for my brush, so the size of my brush, the minimum size of the brush, the flow, how much it comes out. So if you're using a graphics tablet, you can play around with things like flow. But if we move further down, here we've got an area where we can add an alpha to. I'm going to come to that in a second. And then further down here, this is what I'm painting. So if the only thing that you want to paint is an impression, so like an embossing something into this, which is what we want to do here for the arrows, then we don't want to paint any colour, we don't want to paint metalness, we don't want to paint roughness, we just want to paint normal and height. And then the opposite, so if for when we're doing the bit up here that says Nintendo, or the A and the B, those only need colour, right? So they don't need metalness, roughness, normal, map or height. So depending on what you're painting, depends on which ones of these you have selected. So let me give you an example. If I was to draw, let's move over here for a second just so we can have a look at what's going on. So if I drew a little squiggly line here, that's drawing white paint and just colour. Okay. So if I undo that and I say I want it to draw metalness and I want it to be really metally and white. Then I draw again. That's now drawing a metal white on there. Okay, so you've got a bit more of a shine to it. Undo that. Let's say we want to draw roughness, metalness and colour, and we want it to be super shiny, so we want to draw chrome. Now we're drawing chrome onto the asset. Okay, this is picking up the normal details, or the bumpiness of the thing below it, right? So it's picking up the detail of the this NES black, right, which has got a little bit of normal map detail on it. If you don't want to see, or you don't want to have the normal stuff shining through, just come up with whichever layer you don't want it to shine through, come up to where it says base colour, change it to normal, and then this little drop down here, you want to change that to replace. And now it's just going to paint directly over the top. It's going to replace the normal map detail by painting on here. Okay, let's come back to our base colour again. So that's how that works. Now if we wanted to, let's say we want to add the same squiggle, but we want to add perhaps some elevation to it, right? So add our normal and our height. Scroll down to where we've got our height, and if I bring this bar down, this means I'm going to be drawing into the asset, right? So if we look at it from an angle, you can see we've kind of got a little step in. We can make that even more fierce, like that, or we can change it and have it up, so then it's going to build upwards, right? So it's building like a dome shape over the top. Now we're just using a standard brush at the moment to do all this stuff with. So I know that these normal details, I want to paint arrows on this D-pad. Okay, so let me just zoom out so we can see the D-pad in this area. And then I'm going to paint in this one because I want to be, I want to paint, you know, 90-degree angles. So this one, this one, this one, then this one. So what type of brush do I want? Well, I'm not painting colour, so I can turn that off. I don't want to paint metalness or roughness. I only want to paint height, detail. And I don't want to paint high, I want to paint low. We want it to go into the asset slightly. So with that selected, the other thing that I need to do, and I said we'd come back to it later on, is to add an alpha map. So this map in here. So at the minute, it's the alpha on there is a round brush, right? So you can see I've just clicked and it's made an indentation. Okay, I don't want that. I want it to be an image of a triangle. So we can scroll into our little slate that we've got down here, go to alphas, and then in here let's choose this one here, this arrowhead, and you can see that my brush now has changed to the shape of an arrowhead. So now I can come over to here and I can say, well, I want it to be impressed into there, and you can see it's done it for me here. And then I can hold down Control, left click and rotate down or up, and that will rotate it for you. And we want to get it close to bang on 180 degrees as we can, and I'm eyeballing this again just to get it in the right place. That's number 2. Again, hold down Shift, Control, left click, and we want to get another 90 degrees there, and put in our next one here, and then again for the bottom. Done. And now if we look at this and zoom out, we can see that we've got those impressions into the asset, so those details that we wanted, by just painting them in Substance instead of like creating these impressions inside our 3D modelling package like Blender or 3D Studio Max. So going on from that, obviously we want to add in the names, so like Nintendo needs to go up here, the A and the B goes here, B or A, I don't know which way around it is, Start and Select goes at the top here. So all of those details, they can be put in by using alphas, but coming down and looking for, I think it's font, so we just type in font, then let's wait for it to just load up. Here we go, so then we get all these fonts here. Look. So those, let's choose something that looks similar to what we want. You cannot, at the moment, import fonts into Substance Painter. You can import fonts into Substance Designer and then kick those out so that they work in Substance Painter. Or your other option is to create something like this, a font that has the correct font for Nintendo, as a simple black and white image. So you use Photoshop to do that. So literally open Photoshop, create a black square, type Nintendo in the font that you want, so you can download and import the fonts into Photoshop. Have the word Nintendo in white, and then you'll be able to stamp that detail just like we did with our triangles here. So let me just go back then and explain that. So just like the triangle can do an impression like that, it can also, if we choose to, not have height and normal, just have colour and then choose colour red, we can also use it as a way of stamping in a colour, right? See? So that's what we're going to do in terms of adding in the Nintendo font. So let's go back into alphas, let's scroll down, font, and let's choose, I think one of these was kind of close. I'm going to go with this one, I think, that one there. I don't think it's quite right, but we're going to use it. But what these allow us to do is, with one of them selected, you can see I've got it in my hand now, so I've got substance here. So I'm holding down Control, allows me to rotate it, and then using the mouse scroll wheel allows me to make it bigger or smaller. And then the other thing that I want to do is, it's not a normal detail. This is where I want to put in a texture, so I'll put in a colour detail in here. So I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to click on new layer here, and this is going to be painting underscore text, painting text, and then here I can change whatever it is I'm painting. So I've got this selected, I've got my brush selected, I've got this selected. It means I can go in here and I can change this to say Nintendo. And then we've got Nintendo there. We can choose the colour, so I think it's probably still set to red, which is correct. We don't want to paint metalness, roughness, normal or height. It doesn't have any of those, it's just a print. And we find the area of the asset that we want to put it in. So it's right up at the top here somewhere, so it's somewhere here. Again, I haven't got the control in front of me, so I'm going to guess this. I'm guessing it's around here. Something like that. Okay, and then we can change this then to say A, and then we can put that A, again, Control and scroll wheel, and we can change this again to B, and that's added those details in there for us. Okay, so the font's wrong, so you want to import the correct font in order for it to work well, but that's how you add those in. Last thing that you probably want to start doing, I think I put on the classroom a print for the back of the controller. Let me just check I did. I think I did. Here it is, and there's controller rear image. So this here you can use if you download the Targa, I believe. Let's download that. Let's put it just here. Okay, and then we go to import that as a texture again. So import resources, add a resource. There it is. And that again, it's a texture. And we want to import it to this. There it is there. So that we should be able to paint. So let's open up a new layer. Let's call this normal. And then I want to paint this detail on a brush. Let's make sure I've got my brush selected. I don't want this alpha needs to go. And then I want to paint this guy. Let's try and remember how to do this. I think. Bear with me 1 second if I remember. Okay, I think it's normal, and you bring this guy into the normal. And then, there we go, so we're painting it. We don't want to paint height. Let's turn that off. There we go. And then we just find where we want that to go. So, in fact, probably easier to do it in here. So it kind of goes somewhere here. Somewhere like that. Let's make sure, hold on. Let's put height back on, but make sure it's zeroed out. Try that again. We're still getting a little bit of fade on here. That's a shame. I don't want to have that. I think our colour here might not be quite right. Let's try it with a. Let's change our brush. So I think that brush is quite hard-edged brush. Let's choose the alpha of a softer brush. It's going to be quicker to do it this way. Hold on, give me 1 second. Brushes. Soft brush. Okay, let's try that. That's better. Hardness is turned off. Okay. Timing. Yeah, that's correct. Maybe I think it's the hard brush that's causing the edges, which we don't want. Not what I want at all. But if we turn it off, we get a stamp. Okay. Maybe that it's better to create the this normal as an alpha and stamp it in instead using alphas instead of trying to do it with a normal map. Although I'm sure I've got this to work in the past. Yeah, that all seems fine. I don't think any of these other ones are going to help us in this at this moment. We'll keep it on soft. I think it looks better with it flat on. But yeah, I think bring it in as an alpha. So have that as a black and white texture and bring it in as an alpha. Your other option is for us to just edit the normal map later on in Photoshop and just stick it in. It must be something to do with the normal not being quite the right colour. Anyhow, I guess the only other thing is to dirty it up a little bit. So how can you kind of make things look a little bit more messy? So at the moment it's pristine, it's like a brand new NES controller. So to dirty it up a little bit, we want to make changes to certain textures in here. So the buttons, for example, those perhaps we want to have some fingerprint marks on them, and the D-pad as well, so that gets pressed a lot, so maybe that's going to have some fingerprint marks in it as well. So to do that, again, we're going to come in and use a brush. I'm going to use a brand new layer. I'm going to call it Fingerprints, and then on this one we're going to add in fingerprints. So we're going to come to our brushes. We want to make sure we've got a soft brush. In fact, no, I'm going to choose a hard brush, and then we're going to just check if that's now. No, I'm still not doing it. I'm convinced I can get this to work. No. Okay. Either way, let's carry on. I'm going to turn that off. I want to bring in so fingerprints. We don't want height detail. We don't want normal detail. What we do want, we don't want colour either. We're going to change the roughness. So where a fingerprint has gone on, it's probably not going to be as shiny. It's going to be dull where someone's kind of grubby finger's been pressing. So I'm making sure that I've got my brush selected. I'm set my material to just rough, and then I can go in and choose fingerprints. So you'll find them in the alphas. Type in finger and you'll get a kind of short list of them for you. In here, let's say we've got this one. If you hover over it, leave your mouse over it, it will show you a little example of what it is. I think this one here is the thumb, so let's choose that one. And then making sure that we've got our roughness set to high or high-ish. That means that we can go into the asset. We can either paint in here and just say, right, I want a fingerprint there, or you can come and look and paint directly in here. So it might be better in here because it means you're not going to paint on this section, because if you paint on here, it's painting on everything, right? So you can see now it's painted down there as well as on the actual button, whereas if I paint in here, I'm only going to paint on the actual button. Oh, this is upside down, didn't realise that. So I'll paint here, for example. That's only going to paint on the button, it's not going to paint on the bit underneath. Oh, it is painting on the bit underneath. That's interesting. It is not. Huh. How weird. There we go. Okay, well maybe it does. That's a bit of a shame. I didn't want it to paint here. Let's put fingerprints all over this guy. We'll put fingerprints over the B button. If you press and Control and left click, you can change the direction. Oops! Change the direction in which the paint brush is moving. And if we zoom out, we can see that we've got put those details now on here as well. So from an angle, you can see that we've got little grubby fingerprint marks on that part as well. Okay, so the other thing that you probably want to do once you've added in some like fingerprints and things, don't go too over the top with this. It's a little bit too obvious that I've done here. You may probably want to be a little more subtle with this. To be more subtle, you simply either you can add them on pretty hard and then go in and reduce the opacity of that map so that it's affecting it less. Interesting. It should be affecting it less. Strange. The other way is to just bring your roughness down. So if you're on 0, then your so I've painted here. You can see it's very lightly changed the asset there. Well, I've just pressed that back down. The higher this is, means the more you're going to see it, or the lower it is, means the shinier it's going to be. So you can see if someone's been playing around with your controller with really wet, grubby fingers, then maybe they're going to have more shiny, leave shiny prints on there. So add those in, and then the other thing that you want to do is perhaps add a bit of grime and dirt to the asset. So to do that, we're going to create a new layer above everything, and we can move it later on if we decide that we don't want it on certain parts of the asset. So I'm going to create a fill layer. This one's going to be dirt. So I don't want height detail, I don't want normal detail, I want rough metalness and colour. My colour is going to be sort of, I don't know, a murky browny colour. We want sort of, that's a little bit green for me. There we go, that sort of colour. It's sort of just a dirty colour right there. And then we're not metal at all, so make sure metal's all the way down, and then we want it to be solid rough, so we want it to be just basically dirt. Okay. So this texture here, we're going to add, let's make sure I rename it to dirt. And then this one I want it to, perhaps I want the whole asset to be dirty inside where the crevices are and things like that. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to tell it that I want to add a mask to it. So I'm going to add a black mask originally, which means it's not going to show up at all. And then that mask, I'm going to right click and I want to add a generator. So this is going to tell it that I want it to apply this dirt texture in certain areas. So with the generator selected, I can go dirt here, and you see how where it's white is where it's going to put the detail. So you can see anywhere where there's little sort of crevices, that's where it's going to put the detail. So clicking on dirt now means that the dirt's applied. See, it's built up a lot inside these areas here. Anywhere where there's sort of recesses, it's going to fill with dirt. We can then, with the dirt selected, come up here and reduce the amount of dirt level that it's putting in there. So maybe it's only dirty in certain places. We can reduce how contrasty, so how much dirt do you want added in there, or how little do we want added in there, so we can reduce that down. And then the amount of grunge as well, so if we want it to be really dirty, or if we don't, or if we want to change the scale of the dirt, we can edit it there as well. So subtle changes I advise that you add in, don't go overboard. But that's me kind of adding little dirty bits inside. Let's say, for example, that you wanted the edges to be roughed up, so that the controllers kind of hit the floor and whatever. What we could do, I'm just going to change the initial colour that we had here. I'm going to add a new fill. I'm going to grab it and just push it all the way down to the bottom, so it's just above my grey. And then this fill layer, we're going to come into our textures, our materials, sorry, our smart materials here. And then inside these smart materials, once it loads, we've got things such as, my computer's lagging slightly, here we go, so things like painted steel. that have got like saw edge or grazed edges. If I click on painted steel, it should update. Do I need to double click maybe? Apply it. There we go. So you can see that painted steel now. Which one is it? So I just lost it. Oh, let's put it at the top. There you go. So it's here. It's over the top of everything. We could tell that we wanted it to only go in a certain place. So again, we could say I only want you to be on the main controller. Oops. Make sure you colour pick. I only want it to be on the main controller. And then we can go in and choose the different colours. So the paint, for example, perhaps we don't want it to be red, we want it to be white. And the metal, we could go in there and change the metal to be a different colour as well. So all of these things that we can kind of edit and change. And smart materials will only work, this is important, they'll only work if you have a curvature map baked in. If you don't have a curvature map, it won't know where edges are, and it won't add those edges, those details in. So we could go back again and we can say in our layers that our paint isn't metallic, our roughness, we could make it harder rough. We could try and get this paint to look something more like plastic if we wanted. We can go into, where is our paint fill? Here's our base, this is the base, this is the metal that's underneath this bit here. So again we could say actually it's not metal, or it is super shiny metal, etc. Okay, so that's how we can go in and make those changes. I'm just going to delete that one now just to show you. That was just an example. Okay, so that's how things work. Now just quickly, instead of starting this again in Blender, I'm showing you it with Blender because it works exactly the same way. The only thing that you won't have with Blender, the Blender version, is that ID map. So how do we do things without an ID map? So it's quite simple. If I add in another fill layer right on the very top, so this is now got this colour which I'm going to choose. Let's do a violent colour so that we remember it. So let's go with this horrible bright green. Cool. Okay, so this is the colour I've chosen. And if I only want that to go on the area that was black on the controller, right? Instead of right clicking and choosing mask with colour selection, we just go up and give it a black mask. Okay, so it just gets rid of it basically. So now anywhere that we highlight white is going to have that colour on. So to do that, we come over here to this button. If we click on that, and then over here we can choose if we want to fill triangles, polygons, the entire asset, or floating islands. So floating islands as in islands within the unwrap. Okay. So if I choose, I only want it to be on this one, this one, this one, and this one. That means I'm going to need to choose polygons. I'm going to say I want it to go here, 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 and here. And you can see it's filled that area. Okay. So instead of using an ID map, we've just told it which areas we want it to go. And if we wanted it to be on, this button, the red buttons, then we can click here if we wanted to on so islands or UV chunks, it's calling them, and just click. So we can say I want it to go on there and I want it to go on there. So ID maps are great, and they're really good for when you've got much more complicated objects. For something as simple as this, we probably don't need to use an ID map. We can just use a black fill, a black mask, and then use this button here and these over here in order to fill it with different textures and colours. Okay, so I'll delete that. Cool. Substance then allows you to have a look at it in a sort of nicer rendered window. So to do that, we just come up here in this little image of a camera, click on that image of the camera, and it will open it up in a sort of nice virtual environment, where again the controls are exactly the same. So Alt and left click will allow you to rotate around, the scroll wheel will zoom in and zoom out, and then holding down the scroll will allow you to pan left, right, up and down. If you choose it, obviously we've got this world in here at the moment. Obviously I don't want to render it with that world in the background, so I can come down here on my display settings, and I can tell it that I want it to render to a clear background. So I can just click on Clear Coat Background, and then we can change. So at the moment I've got this nice grey, we can change that to any colour that we want, and it will change that background colour for us, so that we can render with different backgrounds. If you want to use the the texture that's in the background, then we can change that texture. So if we scroll further down, it is oh, maybe it's at the top. Yeah, it's at the top. So here where it says environment map, we can change this to any of these different types of environments. So if we want it to be in a deserty looking environment, then we can select that and it will put it in that environment. Or if we want to change it to be in a I don't know, in a space, then we can click on that. We're in the sort of in the clouds texture. Either of those you can leave those on, and they will stay there. So if we go and turn it back to a clear, it's still using that clouds detail in the background, that cloud map. So if we change it, we'll go orangey now. If we change that, we can go to like a photography studio. So it depends on which sort of look you're going for, but you can change it in here. So then you can do a render here. So you click on Save Render, choose your file size, and click on Save Render. If you want to render with wireframe, then make sure you come down to here, and we can turn on wireframe there. Reason why it's off at the minute is, I don't know. I'd like this to be turned on. I don't think the environment has anything to do with it. Settings. Oh, you got post settings in here. So if you want to do fancy little sort of depth of field things, then you can. Disable IRA depth of field. Okay, I've got other things set up at the moment. You can change saturation, colour, brightness, all that sort of stuff. All these sort of things you can probably do in Photoshop as well anyway, but if you can do them on the fly here, then that's good. Not sure, I can't see I can't add my wireframe at the minute. I'll make sure I add a little tip on this video, just say how. Okay, I might because it's actually rendering. No, it's not. Okay, so that's how we do that. Come out of that, you just click on the camera again, you can come back to where you are inside Painter. Cool, relatively long tutorial. The last thing is make sure you save your work. Oh, by the way, here you can rotate around. Holding down Alt and left clicking allows you to rotate. If you want to snap it back to being straight again, then just hold down Shift as well, and then you can snap it, and it'll snap it back to center. Cool, there we go. Hope that helps, and good luck texturing.